Hi, everybody. We're very pleased to have in our studios today here at KVPI the voice of the LSU Tigers, Chris Blair. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to it. You know, the football season around the corner, and pretty soon the listeners here are going to be getting ready for LSU football 2018.
Absolutely, Chris. For those who did not have the opportunity, a little earlier you were the featured speaker at Rotary. Give us a little background information about your personal life.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in eastern Kentucky, and grew up in a radio family, and I've been inside radio stations from the time I can remember, even farther back than that, actually. And grew up around the business. That's what Dad did. And as I got older, my mother, again, was trying to keep me away from the broadcasting business the best she could. And, I did for a while, and worked at it part-time through high school and also into college. And then after getting my degree, was totally set to go in a totally different direction than broadcasting. And then the sports broadcasting on a whim, helping my dad out in a pinch who was short a couple of people. I did that, and that's when the family business sucked me right back in, and that's where I've been ever since. So it's funny how things work out. And still love to be on the radio. Still listen to the radio, and prefer listening to games on the radio as opposed to watching them. If I'm at home and LSU isn't playing and there's a big game on, I'll go find it where I can listen to it as opposed to watching. I just love radio.
What is it about radio that appeals to you and to a lot of people, a lot of LSU fans?
I think some of it is nostalgia. I think a piece of it is. I think you remember either your grandparents or your parents or family members that really enjoyed the radio, and you saw the enjoyment they got out of it. And sometimes I think as a youngster you wanted to see that excitement, so you became part of it. You would sit with them and you would listen. And then I think there's some of it that you long for that now. But from a technical side, I'm a fan of radio just because I love the theater of the mind, and we hear that phrase a lot. Anybody who's in the business has heard it, and that's part of what we all do. But I really enjoy it. And somebody who's very good on the radio can capture my attention and hold my attention for a very, very long time, whether it's storytelling, whether it's news, whether it's an interview, whether it's even a music show where there's some information about the artist, about the time period. I'm just a big fan. And when it comes to sports, I just prefer it. I think the broadcasters on radio, the descriptions, I like taking their words and building that picture in my mind as opposed to just watching the television.
You were telling us at Rotary, and you had told me earlier that it was basically you had no intention of going into sports broadcasting at all, but because you tried to help your dad out in a pinch, that you did your first play-by-play games, right?
Yeah, he was.
And you weren't expected to be paid.
No, I just was filling in. They needed some help on some high school football, and I said, sure. I played all three, baseball, basketball, and football coming up in high school, and I said, sure, I can do that. And, did it a couple of weeks and, went back to college, and then a couple of weeks later I got a check. And I said, what is this for? And he said, well, that's for doing the games. And I said, wow, you pay people to do the games. I thought you did it because it was fun to do. For me, as a former athlete who hit his athletic ability in that ceiling sooner than I would have liked, for me it was a chance to be part of the game, be around the coaches, be around the players. So I thought it was quite a privilege. And to find out that they will pay you to do that, that was really an eye-opener. Again, I was 19, 20 years of age. And once I kind of put the two together, that this is a lot of fun, this is a great job, and oh, by the way, they pay you for it, sounds like something maybe I could get into. And again, as I said, my mother, once she realized that light had gone off in my head, she just threw up her hands. I think at that point she knew the cat was out of the bag.
She didn't want you there. She didn't want you to do this.
No, absolutely. I was on my track, got a degree in political science.
You had that degree.
Yeah, I was going to head on to law school, and that's what she wanted. She wanted her son to be an attorney. And again, I say that in jest a little bit, but she was married to a broadcaster, and she knew the hours and she knew the time that it took away from family, which we all do. Almost all jobs, if you're good at it and work hard at it, there's going to be times you're taken away from things that maybe you'd like to be doing. But I think part of it was in jest. But yeah, she had hoped that I would not be following in my father's footsteps. But to this day, they're two of my biggest fans, and without some of the decisions they both made, I wouldn't be here today. So.
Who was your inspiration as far as a sportscaster, sports announcer on radio when you were young?
Well, first of all, my dad. He was an owner-operator, but he also called games.
He did?
Did high school games, small college games. So, I would tag along with him. He would let me carry a clipboard, which meant I got into the games for free, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world. Again, I didn't know they paid you. I just thought you got to go in for free. And then Kaywood Ledford, who was my dad's hero and a lot of people's hero. He was the longtime voice of the Kentucky Wildcats. And to me, he was the gold standard growing up. I mean, he was not only when Kentucky was finished with their season, he was hired by the national companies to do the NCAA tournament. Wow. That's how good he was. So he was a hero. Jim Fife was a longtime voice of Auburn. He grew up in a small town not far from me in Kentucky, so he was one I looked to. And then later on, I got a chance to work with Jim Phillips, who was the voice of the Clemson Tigers. And, getting to work with your heroes pretty impressive, too. So those are a couple. But I think it starts with Dad because he's the first guy I was around that did radio and kind of exposed me to the industry.
I want you to share a story that you shared with the Rotarians earlier today, Chris, about the phone call that you got while you were eating crawfish in Monroe, and you got a fateful phone call about the LSU position.
Yeah, before I took the job at LSU, I was at Georgia Southern University, which is about 21,000 students outside of Savannah, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And I had called football, basketball, and a little baseball for them in 10 years. And I was on a basketball trip to take on the University of Louisiana Monroe. Mm-hmm. So we flew in on a Friday. The game was Saturday afternoon there in Monroe. And that Friday night, me and I think the sports information director and maybe one of the assistant coaches had gone out to a local restaurant to have dinner. And we ordered our dinner. The owner of the restaurant came by, found out we were from Georgia Southern, and as I have found out most Louisianans are, he rolled out the red carpet. Welcome to Monroe, welcome to Louisiana. Do you guys like crawfish? I said, we'll try it, never had it. Brings out a giant platter of crawfish and get a phone call, and I'm told that Jim Hawthorne had recently announced that he was going to retire at the end of the basketball season coming up. He would finish this basketball season, he would do football, and then at that next basketball season would be his last. And so I got back to Georgia on Monday and sent off a resume and some demo tapes and just waited to hear. And that was in late February, and it was radio silence, as we say, until Memorial Day. And then I was asked to come down to do an interview. Came down for 2 days, did the interview, and then maybe 2 to 3 weeks later, got the phone call saying, we'd like for you to come to Baton Rouge, and we'd like for you to replace the legendary Jim Hawthorne and have the privilege of calling LSU football, basketball, and baseball. So I'll never forget that phone call. I'll never forget where I was sitting. I'll never forget the color of the phone that I used.
What color? It
was black. It was our black office phone. They had my office number, and when it rang, the number came up, and it said Baton Rouge, and it was a big moment. And I immediately said yes and said, when do you need me? I'll be there tomorrow. I'll pack my bag now. It was exciting. My family was excited. We were excited. And a couple of months later, we moved to Baton Rouge, and the rest is history. We love it here. My wife loves it in Louisiana. My kids absolutely love it. And I tell this joke all the time. I was born in a small coal mining town in eastern Kentucky, but I really believe the state of Louisiana was built for a guy like me, or I was built for a state like Louisiana. I just love everything about it. I love the culture. I love the music. I love the food. I love the people. I love the water. I love the Mississippi. I love the coast. I love the Gulf. I love everything about it. So it's almost as if I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Great. What is it about LSU that attracts so many people, and people are so passionate about the school and about its history?
Well, when I look back on it, I'm a student of history, and to me, it's the one thing through all the good and the bad, this state has gone through, and disasters, man-made and otherwise. It's the one thing that everybody can kind of forge together wherever you are. And I've been in a lot of different places over the last 3 years in this state. And the one thing you can almost always assure go to when you want an icebreaker or a conversation starter is just say, how about them Tigers? You say that, and immediately somebody in that group is going to take you on, and that conversation will begin. And I think it's just a big part of the fabric of people's lives. again, I think nostalgia has a big part of it. I mean, people remember certain games and where they were or who they were with. And, when you think LSU, you think Louisiana. You cannot separate the two. And for me, having grown up in Kentucky, having lived in South Carolina and Georgia, even I knew from afar the impact that LSU has, not only on the state of Louisiana, but as a national brand. I mean, when you think about some of the big collegiate brands across the country, if I asked you name the biggest brands, you'll typically get, in no particular order, Notre Dame, LSU, North Carolina, Kansas, Duke. Mm-hmm. There's a small group. I mean, when you consider all the teams that play and all the colleges and universities that have teams, there's a handful that people know right off the bat. And when they see the Tiger Eye and they see those three letters, they know exactly what you're talking about.
Chris, share with me your feeling that came across when you did that very first game in Tiger Stadium, that very first night.
That was,
give me the rush or the feeling, or just share your emotions that night.
It's interesting. My first year with football, we opened up the season in Green Bay at Lambeau Field, which is, again, if you name some legendary venues, Lambeau Field's going to come up. So Absolutely. It was incredible to be there for that game, sitting in that booth. Had a chance to tour the facility the day before and all the history. But it wasn't quite like the following week back in Baton Rouge at Tiger Stadium. And I say that with all sincerity. I mean, it was a thrill for me to be at Lambeau Field. But that first night on a Saturday night in Tiger Stadium, under the lights, looking down on that field, the Tiger Eye at midfield, the crowd coming in, it was, again, much like that phone call that I got, it's something I'll never forget. I mean, it was hard for me to believe that I was sitting there. I thought about my dad. I thought about my grandparents. I thought about my wife and my kids. I thought about, doing high school games when I was younger in the back of a truck. A press box had been condemned at a high school we played at, a visiting team. When we got there, they told us we couldn't go to the press box to set up our broadcast gear. But not to worry. They had a Chevy truck. They had backed up to the 10-yard line on the sideline, and they were going to put a table in the back of the truck, and we were going to call the game from the back of the truck at field level, which, as you can imagine, once they got beyond the far side hash, we couldn't see them. So I thought about those things, and I thought, here I am with one of the best seats in all of sports, looking down on this field with 102,000 of my closest friends. And when the Tigers came out of the chute to start that game, I don't know, a few times, getting married, having your children, and sitting there for that ball game. They're all kind of up there.
That's fantastic, Chris. One more thing. How much time do you do in preparation for a football game?
About 4 days. 4 days, office hours, 8 to 5. Take some of it home. But Monday after a game, kind of a slow day. Everybody's calculating the stats and what happened that weekend and kind of putting it together in a concise format. Then I gather that Monday evening. And then on Tuesday morning, we'll start, putting together my charts. Got to work with the coaches, try to figure out who's going to be on the two deep, the starter and the backup, build these charts, which take about 2 days. And then got to do the same thing for the opposing team coming up, which is a little harder because at LSU, I go to practice. I'm around the coaches. I kind of have a feeling. But the other team I have to do a lot of research on. So I go to the internet. We get emails from the other schools. They'll send us information. We start trying to digest that. And then I'll usually either type or write the notes on those players. I find that when I write them, I learn them a little bit better than just looking at it on paper. So I'll go through on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and typically the hay's in the barn, so to speak, by Thursday night. Having the boards ready, my charts ready, all the stats that I think are important to that matchup. I was told a long time ago, prepare for the lights to go out and you to have to be on the air with no action for 3 hours. Prepare to be able to talk about the matchups, the teams, the coaches, the players, with no action, just in case.
Wow.
Now, the truth is, when the game is over, I probably only used about 10% of the stuff that I gathered because the game dictates what happens.
Right.
But there are times in timeouts and between plays where you try to give the audience a little information about the other team and the other guy's quarterback or the coach or the rivalry itself. But I find that about 10 to 15% is all I use. But I'm ready. Because the worst thing in the world, as you well know, is to sit down in front of a mic and hit the on button and try to freewheel it. I typically don't try to operate that way because I think the audience can tell when you're not prepared.
Chris Blair, this has been a great pleasure of mine. Thank you for taking time for your busy schedule to join us here in Ville Platte and here at KVPI. All the best, my friend, and we're looking forward to another great season for LSU. Go Tigers.
Well, first of all, Mark, thank you for having me. Thanks for everybody here at Ville Platte, my first visit. And
Hopefully it will not be the last.
I plan to be back. I really do. And thanks to what you and your staff do here to help us get the word out about the LSU Fighting Tigers all season long. Without you guys, I'd just be talking to myself. So thank you.
Again, our special thanks to the voice of the LSU Tigers, Chris Blair, for visiting with us here at KVPI and being the special guest speaker over at the Ville Platte Rotary Club. Thanks again, Chris Blair, everybody.